move forward. We are working on slide advancing. There we go, great. So the main questions we'll be handling today are, how do schools define healthy social and emotional development? How do schools support students' social and emotional development? And how do schools measure and report on social and emotional developmental milestones or outcomes or objectives? We'll be doing another webinar in May, which will go over more of programmatic questions related to social and emotional learning, but today we're really getting down to the foundations. There's a delay in the slide advancing, so just please be patient. Great, there we go. So first and foremost, I want to emphasize for you all that a lot of the time we spend in schools, we think about cognitive development. We think about improving students' academic performance through the development of cognitive complexity, right? Problem-solving abilities, attention regulation. We also think about physical development when we were talking about physical education, et cetera, although it's not always first and foremost in our priority system. But social and emotional development cannot be disconnected from cognitive development and physical development. Social and emotional development happens in parallel with cognitive development and physical development. For example, a child who has challenges in physical development may not be able to access his or her environment, aspects of his or her environment enough or at as high of a level to develop some of the cognitive problem-solving skills or to develop some of the social and emotional skills that are developed through experience. So that's just one example of how physical, cognitive, and social and emotional skills develop in parallel together through interaction with a child's environment. And so this is why we provide complex, healthy environments for young people to grow in all domains of functioning. Some of the things we'll talk about in the area of social and emotional development are recognition of self and other, social approach and avoidance issues, and emotion regulation. We'll be talking about these kinds of things. Great. Okay, good, it'll stay there. So some of the domains we're going to talk about today to understand better what we mean by social and emotional development. We'll talk about dimensions of social competence, attachment, emotional competence, self-perceived competence, and temperament and personality. What I'd like you to consider as we go through the definitions of each of these is what your school is already doing to support students' growth in each dimension. The reason why I ask this is to prompt you to be thinking about how social and emotional development is already supported in almost all schools. In most schools, we have school adults who are there to support young people in environments that are built to support young people and that are healthy social and emotional environments for young people. So as I go through this, what I'd like you to be thinking is what you're already doing to support social and emotional health. First, social competence is effectiveness in developmentally appropriate social interactions. I'd like to underscore the phrase developmentally appropriate, because what a developmentally appropriate social interaction would look like in kindergarten is very different from what a developmentally appropriate social interaction would look like in 9th grade. And something that schools need to be considering is what do we expect from the social interactions of young people, and how do we set up our environment to be supportive of them achieving developmental milestones for social interaction at different levels that are appropriate for that age level, and also how do we make sure our behavioral expectations are consistent with the developmental level of the young people that we're serving in terms of what we expect from their social interactions. The second is the formation of a deep and enduring connection with caregivers. This is the attachment bond. Now, what schools can do to support this? So we have attachment to schools, attachment to school related adults, which we often refer to as school connectedness. We also have attachment to family members and caregivers, and schools have a lot that they can do to support and encourage healthy attachment bonds between young people and their families. Sometimes in a more restricted view of family engagement practices, we're talking about just one-way communication from schools to parents about what's happening on school campus. But in a more complex, well-developed system, you'll have family engagement strategies that are intended to not only improve families' knowledge of what's happening on school campus, but to help target the actual bonds between children and their parents. All right, emotional competence, strategic awareness of one's own and others' emotions, and to act on this awareness to negotiate interpersonal exchanges and regulate emotional experience. So emotional competence is something that there's a growing effort in the country to support emotional competence. It's not always been something we've addressed. Historically, we've really addressed the behavior associated with an internal emotional state. So we've set up environments with strict behavioral controls, right? Reinforcements and punishments related to external behavior, but we've not always spent a lot of time cultivating the internal awareness of young people of their emotional experience. We've not spent a lot of time growing emotional vocabulary for them to be able to self-identify the range of emotional experience they have, to be able to identify kind of the antecedents, the things that the way their body starts to feel when they're having an emotional experience. And then also how to translate that awareness of your own internal emotional state into being able to have healthy interactions with peers and with school adults, to be able to communicate about an emotional experience so that it helps others empathize with where a child might be coming from and helps understand the context of their behavior a little bit better. So your colleague, Bob Thompson, is going to talk to you about this one in particular in a little bit. Self-perceived competence, one's evaluation of one's own abilities, cognitive, physical, and social, especially in comparison to others. Now, this is the idea that we are providing support to young people for having healthy self-evaluations, having a healthy idea of approaching tasks from a growth mindset. For example, the idea that we are learning and growing, and that the understanding that we may not be have perfect achievement on all tasks the first time, but that growth is what we are looking for, and to be able to be self-aware of how one is performing in relationship to others. And temperament and personality, individual differences in reactivity and self-regulation. We know this from working with young people. In a general classroom, you might have some children with very sunny dispositions who are always happy and come bouncing in with a buoyant attitude no matter what is happening in their home life or what happened on their way to school. And you might have other children who have are not necessarily blessed with as funny of a disposition, but may have a little bit harder time bouncing back from disappointment and may need some encouragement in that respect. So those are some of the dimensions to be thinking about in terms of social and emotional development. All right, I'd like for Bob Thompson to unmute himself if possible and talk to the group a little bit about the kind of emotion regulation that you all have been encouraging in your students in Berlin.
Thanks, Megan. Can everybody hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. The slide that you're all looking at is got a picture. It's actually two different stories, and one of the stories starts with the picture. We are heavily invested in a social emotional learning curriculum at Brown School, which is our K-2 school, and it's basically called Everyday SEL Mindful Practices. And so it incorporates social emotional learning and development strategies with mindfulness and yoga. And I think the thing that we love the most about the yoga piece is that it's an actual physical intervention, and these kids sometimes need that. There are a lot of other curriculums out there that don't seem to have the physical get up and move a muscle and change a thought and piece to it. So, but the picture is a student during the NWEA testing, which was that Northwest Evaluation Assessment, or Educational Assessment. It's the student achievement testing we do several times a year, and he was getting stressed, and so just on his own, he stood up and did a combination of a couple different yoga poses. There's a mountain pose connected with an eagle pose, and he got up and he started doing some lion's breath, which is a breathing intervention, and just collected himself and sat down and continued working on the test. You can see his Chromebook there. We have one-to-one technology, and then you can see from the narrative, I think it said that well, no, there is no narrative about that. His NEWA scores actually went up 23 points, which was, if you know anything about NEWAs, if you can get a 10-point increase from one test to the next, that's pretty substantial, and his went up 23 points. So anecdotal stories, and then there's the other one there about a kindergartner's birthday, and he was having some separation anxiety, and one of the other kindergartners said, just take a deep breath and it'll calm you down, and they all kind of rallied around him. And the next thing we knew, and it was a mother that shared this with us that happened to be a substitute teacher from time to time, it spurred a conversation, and we love that. We want to get our parents to the tipping point, and it's on our website, and parents are aware that we're teaching this curriculum and encouraging students to understand the importance of self-management and self-control and how to manage stress and how to be empathetic and all the things that go with social emotional learning. The most recent story, though, was one that just happened 2 weeks ago. We got an email from a mother of a second grade student on Monday morning 2 weeks ago, and it's brief, I'll just read it. She said, "I just wanted to let you know that my daughter has had a crisis this week. Her older sister was admitted to New Hampshire Hospital following a suicide attempt Monday night. She saw the police and ambulance, but doesn't know the details. I've been working with her to understand by explaining that her sister has gone to a hospital to help her not be sad and stressed all the time. We have kept her busy, and she seems to be taking it in stride. But if she gets weepy, I thought you should know what's up." This is her letter to her her daughter's teacher. "Interestingly, though, my daughter has been talking a lot about yoga. She's been getting me to practice poses and mostly breathing to help me be less grumpy after a 16-hour night shift. I've also seen her use her breathing techniques when overwhelmed. After telling her why her sister's in the hospital, She said she could help her sister by teaching her some of the breathing techniques she learned in class. I plan to support this. I love your teaching coping skills. Keep up the great work. You have inspired my little girl. So, you know, you never know when something like this is going to play a major impactful role in a child's life. And we're starting to see it normalized throughout the school. There are some teachers, just like anything else you bring in, that are practicing mindful practices with more fidelity than others. But as a result of bringing this in and the school board getting wind of it, they've officially supported taken the position that every one of our classes, K through 12, should be adopting a social emotional learning curriculum. This is the second year we have used the Swiss data management system that's connected with PBIS, and we really started to see at Brown School, where our mindful practices curriculum is at its heaviest, some real movement. It's impossible to say what the correlation between any one thing we're doing is and some of the reductions we've seen in our office discipline referrals. However, you know, I mean, we've got a student support center on staff. We have a behavior interventionist at the school now. Our student support center is staffed by a teacher who's going through a board certified behavior analyst program to be a registered behavior technician. So we've adopted ABA at the school as well. But in September, our office discipline referrals were up 33%. In October, they were up 22%, both from last year. In November, they went down 45% from November of last year. In December, they were back up by 24%. January and February were the 2 months with the highest rates, highest numbers and rates of office discipline referrals last year. And our January office discipline referral rates dropped by 114% from the previous year, and our February office discipline referrals dropped by 255%. So we like what we're starting to see. Sometimes you can feel things before you can actually measure them, but we do have observable and measurable data that we believe makes the case for what we're doing is starting to have an impact. So that's what I had to share on that slide.
Bob, that's fantastic. Thank you. In some ways, I feel like we can just conclude the webinar there. But I think I'll move on and talk a little bit more about kind of language we use when we talk about social and emotional learning. And I encourage the audience to be thinking through, you know, how the language I'm going to share with you relates back to what Bob just described, and to be thinking about, you know, how you can start applying this in your own setting. So I think one thing to think about with what Bob shared is that he attended a day-long workshop around social emotional learning, a lot of what you're learning in this webinar, and then took it back to his school district, and they decided as a school district what would be best for their context. And I think that's where they came up with the mindfulness and yoga, and I think that is exactly the way that you should be handling it. Let's move forward on talking a little bit more about the language to use, and then you can, and we'll have some opportunities to share. Thank you so much, Bob. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
So what I'd like you to do while I go through this next section is to be chatting in the chat box, to write your chats in the chat box about what your school is already doing to support social and emotional health and learning. The reason is, of course, people on this webinar are going to learn from me and from Bob, but they'll learn a lot from you all also. So please actively use the chat or raise your hand. And there's a hand raise button on your participant list, and I'll call on you to speak up. All right. So when we think about social emotional learning, we think about what are the developmental tasks that are appropriate for a specific age level and grade level. So when we talk about developmental tasks, we're talking about things that represent a given culture's definition of a typical development at different points in a lifespan. Even in the United States, there's variation across regions about what's expected in terms of development, what's expected in particular regions by people making up those regions. A developmental task describes accomplishments that are expected during a particular period, and they take into consideration maturational changes that occur as children get older. This task or this slide is a little fuzzy for me, but some things to think about. Really, I'll send this paper out so you can all see it subsequently, but basically it breaks down what at each developmental level across the different dimensions of social and emotional health, social competence, attachment, emotional competence, self-perceived competence, and temperament, what would be expected in terms of developmental milestones for each level. And this is Denham et al. 2009, so I will send this out after. There's also, it goes all the way up to the post-secondary level or early adulthood. And the reason for sharing this with you all will mainly be for you to be taking a good hard look at your scope and sequence in your school levels to determine whether, like for example, are your report card objectives for behavior consistent with what's developmentally expected for a particular age level in each social and emotional domain. So consider this: a school's report card evaluates the same behavioral standards for kindergartners as sixth graders. For example, organization, time management, follows direction the first time. How would we change this to be more developmentally aligned? The question is somewhat a rhetorical one, but you would be surprised how often a school is K-6 and it has the same behavioral standards for sixth graders as kindergartners, and also the behavioral standards are limited to maybe just ability to regulate your own ability to self-regulate behavior rather than the full range of social and emotional competencies, everything from ability to regulate yourself, ability to regulate your emotions, ability to communicate about your emotional experience, ability to request breaks when needed, things like that. So we'll keep going. All right, other things to think about when we're talking about social and emotional development, and I know that you all in New Hampshire are not free from this, is that there are many threats that children encounter through the normal lifespan to healthy social and emotional development. Some of the things that occur are I put into two buckets: deprivation and trauma. So deprivation is interruption of caregiving, and interruption in the fulfillment of basic needs. So we talk about poverty, for example, as an interruption of housing or food needs. Interruption of caregiving, so something in the current context is children who either are undocumented themselves or have a parent or both parents who are undocumented may be in fear of or actually be experiencing interruption of caregiving for prolonged periods. Other interruptions of caregiving happen when a parent is experiencing substance abuse issues and may not be available to fill the typical caregiving role. I know that is something that is plaguing some of your communities. So for trauma, community-related violence, domestic violence, child abuse and neglect, these are the kinds of things that can interfere with typical social and emotional, with the meeting of social and emotional milestones. And the reason why I bring this up is because our schools need to be doing something to not only promote promote the achievement of social and emotional developmental milestones, but they need to be attending to and be aware of the threats that the children that they're serving may be experiencing to the achievement of those social and emotional milestones. So the point is, it all fits together, and there's a whole lot of ways to enter this conversation in your community. If, for example, the phrase social and emotional learning is not, people are not keen to take on social and emotional learning as one more program that we have to do, you can enter the conversation this way through talking about threats to the mastery of social and emotional skills. You can talk about social and emotional development as tied strongly to physical development and cognitive development. So something to be thinking about is, what does our school already do to help buffer children from the negative effects of exposure to threats to social and emotional development? So one thing from Bob's description that is so clearly happening in Berlin is that by providing yoga and mindfulness, when children are experiencing threats, potential experiences of trauma, they are using the coping skills that they're being taught in school. So that's something that Berlin is doing to provide children with buffering effects from developmental threats. So one thing to think about is to check your assumptions. So you believe, if you're on this webinar, I'm assuming that you have a special interest in social, emotional health and learning. And so you may not, I might be preaching to the choir. I don't know, maybe some of you need to be won over, and thank you for attending if you do. But you'll need to check your assumptions that you believe and stakeholders in your organization believe that addressing students' ability to master developmental tasks in the areas of social and emotional skills are important, and that the school has a responsibility to address them. So that's an assumption. That's certainly an assumption that I make when I go into a school, but it may not always be true. So it's something to really start with conversation first. Once you have that conversation, then you need to ask the right question, which is, at a beginning level, would be, what social and emotional intervention should we provide, right? So that's just jumping straight to programming. Versus a more advanced way to ask this question is, how do we help ensure that young people in our schools master all developmental tasks for social and emotional domains at all ages and stages of their development? The switching of the way the question is asked can get you a whole lot more traction in a school. I find that having the conversation around that advanced level is much more rich than having a conversation that's directed at what kind of programming do we need to do immediately. So now the phrase social and emotional learning. So we've talked about social emotional development. We've talked about social and emotional developmental milestones. We've talked about the dimensions of social and emotional growth. So let's talk about the phrase social and emotional learning. Social and emotional learning, as defined by the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, is the process through which children and adults acquire and effectively apply the knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. So if I could emphasize one thing to you, social emotional learning does not necessarily have to be a curriculum, nor does it necessarily have to be a program. I'm going to go through with you a few additional considerations there, but just keep that in mind as we go forward. we'll talk about the 5 CASEL competencies. If you've not had the opportunity to visit casel.org, I recommend you start there with your research around CASEL, casel.org. So the 5 areas, the 5 competencies that CASEL talks about are self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. We'll go through each of these. Self-awareness is the ability to recognize, understand, and manage one's emotions, values, strengths, and limitations. Things that they like to see covered by schools and within social emotional learning curricula and strategies include building an accurate self-perception, helping students identify emotions, helping students recognize their own strengths, helping students improve their sense of self-efficacy and optimism, and helping students recognize how thoughts, feelings, and actions are interconnected. Self-management is the ability to set goals and manage emotions and behaviors to achieve them. Things to consider here are impulse control, delay of gratification, stress management, self-discipline and control, perseverance, goal setting, and organizational skills. Social awareness is the ability to show understanding for others, so to empathize and feel compassion for those with different backgrounds or cultures, to understand social norms for behavior, to recognize family, school, and community resources and support. Relationship skills, the ability to form positive relationships and deal effectively with conflict. So establish and maintain healthy and rewarding relationships, act in accordance with social norms, communicate clearly, listen actively, cooperate, resist inappropriate social pressure, negotiate conflict constructively, and seek help when it's needed. Responsible decision-making is the ability to make ethical, constructive choices about personal and social behavior. So constructive choices about personal behavior and social interactions in diverse settings. Consider ethical standards, safety concerns, accurate behavioral norms for risky behaviors, health and well-being of self and others, and to make realistic evaluations of various actions' consequences. What I'd like to underscore for you is that CASEL has done an excellent job of providing a framework or taxonomy for educators. They've really done such a great job of translating research around human development into a realistic framework that educators can put into place immediately. And my reason for giving this presentation the way I have is to help you understand that the CASEL's framework is one taxonomy for thinking about social and emotional skills, and it's especially helpful for educators. But you are not bound to work within the CASEL taxonomy so long as you understand that what you are attempting to do is to improve students' abilities to meet social and emotional developmental milestones at the ages and stages expected. So how do you integrate social and emotional learning into school life? As I've said a couple of times now, it doesn't have to be a program. It doesn't have to be a curriculum. There are other ways. They can be freestanding lessons. So some teachers just, for whatever reason, either they got instruction in it or they just have a personal affection for it, they already give lessons in social and emotional learning related skills, all of those dimensions I just talked about for you from CASEL. They also might just generally use teaching strategies that improve student self-awareness, that improve their emotional competence, that improve their ability to make responsible decisions. Some teachers just already do this. Then other ways are more systematic and occur across teachers and occur across a full school or across a school district. And that could include supporting SEL within the context of academic curriculum. So for example, there are like history programs like Facing History and Ourselves that are officially an academic program, but that incorporate social and emotional learning principles within it. And students need to do writing prompts and reading prompts related to how figures from history have used social and emotional skills for solving problems, for example. And then another way is as a school-wide initiative using an evidence-based social emotional learning program. So this is an example, I think this is the example that most people think of when they think about social emotional learning, and one of the goals for this webinar is to help expand your thinking about what social emotional learning might mean. But in this case, this is simply adopting a social emotional learning program like Second Step or PATHS or Lion's Quest, or there's a whole list of them. We're going to go over that in the next webinar. This would be adopting a program for use in your classrooms. The value of doing an evidence-based program, although, you know, I really want to emphasize to you that you should be thinking about those freestanding lessons. You should be thinking about what teachers do on the day-to-day to support social emotional learning, what the school does just as a matter of course to support social emotional learning. I want you to be thinking from what you're already doing and how you can grow what you're already doing. If you are at a point where you're ready to select a social emotional learning program, some things to think about are that these programs can encourage the use of similar language across teachers and adults across the school. So they might use a stop, think, decide, act language. So for example, that might occur from kindergarten through third grade. All teachers are using that same language for managing interpersonal conflict. So that's where a social emotional learning program can be helpful, is it encourages similar language across teachers. They provide all the materials to support lessons. So all of the curriculum is already developed, and it's usually pretty rich. If you use some of the better programs, there's a lot of the thinking has already been done in terms of developing materials. It also, most social emotional learning programs require some professional development for people who are going to be using them, which means that teachers develop the skills, the prerequisite skills to be able to instruct students. And sometimes some of the hesitancy from teachers is that they didn't receive any formal instruction on how to support social emotional learning. So professional development can really help to reduce anxiety related to the not knowing of being asked to do something you never received your own instruction in. And the other thing about social emotional learning programs, the ones we'll go over in the next webinar in May, is that they have randomized control trial evidence that they're intended to work, that they work as they're intended and when they're implemented with fidelity. So as many of you know, randomized controlled trials are considered the gold standard of evaluation research evidence. And many of the programs that I'll share on my next webinar are supported by RCT evidence. So effective social emotional learning programs are sequenced. They're connected and coordinated in terms of activities to foster skill development. They're active. They include active forms of learning to help students master new skills. They emphasize developing personal and social skills. So what I mean by focus is they have a specific skill within the, often within the CASEL taxonomy that each lesson is focused on, and they're explicit. So they, they help provide students instruction about what exactly they're trying to do, steps to achieve it. And so according to Durlack and colleagues who did a meta-analysis of effective SEL programs, these were the 4 characteristics of all effective social emotional learning programs. So if you were to decide on a program to improve social emotional learning at your school, this is a list of key considerations you should be thinking about. What skills does the intervention target? Does it target all aspects of the CASTLE framework? And is it developmentally appropriate for let's say you're using it for kindergarten, is it going to be developmentally appropriate for kindergarten? And let's say you want to choose the same program from kindergarten to 6th grade, you'll need to make sure that the program provides lessons that are specifically aligned for each developmental level. You'll need to look at the data that support the program in terms of where did they do their evaluation studies. So you're in the Northeast. You want to make sure that the data supporting the program don't come from, I don't know, for whatever, like a region of the United States that does not map onto your demographic or your particular needs in your community. Was there evidence of program effectiveness? I've talked to you a little bit about that. Was the intervention effective for all subgroups or only some subgroups? So for example, did the program work better for females than males? Did the program work better for older students than younger students? You need to be asking those questions. You also need to be asking logistical questions, like what staff training is needed. And you need to make sure that you have the resources to support the required training for the program. Most of these programs don't mean just buying materials and handing them out to teachers. And what's the recommended intervention schedule, and what is the cost, of course? The cost really can vary considerably. So, something to think about is there may be, I probably would have said there is no time like the present before, but now, things are shifting in the world of ESSA. So there may be no time like the present for SEL because each state has more flexibility for supporting programming outside of your typical English language arts, mathematics instruction. And each state has the opportunity to have a indicator of school performance that is not necessarily specifically tied to academics. So it could include school climate or social emotional health. And I think New Hampshire is in the process of working that out. Most states are still figuring all of that out. So it's a good time to be thinking about social emotional learning. It's a good time to think about how social emotional learning links to academic achievement, mental health, etc. I didn't go over that too much in these slides, but suffice it to say, there's a ton of research supporting social emotional learning links to a variety of outcomes. I'd be happy to send you a quick summary brief of all of the links between implementing social emotional learning as designed and improvements in academic and other school performance outcomes. Another thing to think about is if you're going to be prioritizing social emotional learning, then you should probably be reporting on social emotional learning to your parents and to your community members. So think about clarifying what you need children to achieve at each age and stage for social and emotional development. Think about what techniques that you'll need to do to assess progress to determine whether children are making progress towards reaching those developmental tasks. So something that I know Bob is doing in Berlin is they're doing piloting screening for social and emotional well-being. So that's a way to show progress over time for social and emotional learning. And then your summative, so thinking about how do your report, like I said at the beginning of the webinar, how do you ensure that your report cards or whatever mechanism you use for reporting progress in school also are developmentally appropriate for social and emotional skills. All right. Some states are starting the process or have already developed social and emotional learning statewide standards. It's my understanding that New Hampshire is working on this. There aren't published standards, but it's not something that local districts can't do themselves. So if you are in a local district that's really wants to be at the vanguard of this work, then you can consider what would benchmarks be at each of our age levels. What would we like to see students achieve for each of the developmental competencies in social and emotional health and across the 5 CASEL taxonomy areas? What would we like to see? And I know that CASEL is working with several states to develop standards. So as far as what to do next, when you're finished with this webinar, I'm sure you're just going to get right off and go head into your social emotional work. So clarify expected social emotional developmental tasks for each grade level. Adopt a technique that assesses progress toward each social and emotional developmental task, and adopt a reporting process for sharing evidence of progress. Of course, this might be a bigger picture question. Some of the earlier questions you could be talking to others about are just mapping what you're currently doing. I asked you to consider earlier what the school is already doing to support those 5 CASEL areas. So before you jump into reporting progress, you might think about, let's map on which of our teachers already feels competent in supporting social emotional learning, and of those teachers, what are they currently doing in their classrooms? You might find that already teachers, for whatever reason, own social emotional learning curricula and are using them and like them. That might be 1 second grade teacher and 1 fifth grade teacher. So you may need to be doing some more dissemination of best practice within your school. So as far as a webinar next time, we'll be learning resources for selecting an evidence-based social emotional learning program, and we're going to compare and contrast several popular SEL programs. So at this point, I welcome you to unmute yourself, ask questions, tell me anything that was unclear that you want clarification about, anything you want me to deliver more information on next time, or that you want additional follow-up resources on. I'm very happy to support your continued learning.
Megan, I wonder if you wanted to speak to the sort of conversations that you might have with educators when you bring back the idea of starting a social and emotional curriculum or program in a school.
Thanks. That's a good question. I think the start is, well, I mean, actually, if Bob is still on the line, maybe Bob can answer from the time you went to training on social emotional learning to the time you actually moved on mindfulness, where did you start with that conversation?
Yeah, good question. I think that where we began was that it was really clear to us that we were getting a lot of students coming into our school system who were not ready to learn, if that makes sense. And so how could we help them with their development? And so at the same time, we were developing a PBIS team and learning about our PBIS external coaches' viewpoints on executive functioning skills. And I actually came across the Illinois social emotional learning site in my quest to kind of find standards. And so it just kind of grew organically as a result of students that were showing up to kindergarten who clearly weren't ready to learn, and that had come from early childhood programs where the assumption was they were picking up some of these skills, and come to find out that really wasn't the case. So we just all kind of got together and said, what are we going to do about this? Because there was a lot of learning that couldn't take place. And I know that actually one of our staff is actually on the line too, and Marie Arlabante. I did see her number on there. If she wants to, chime in with any of this, I know there's not a lot of time left, but that's kind of how we started on our journey, if that helps.
Yeah, I think Bob, it helps with understanding kind of the types of challenges that might lead you down the path of considering social and emotional programming to support young people. I think that the conversations to have, it really depends on context for each of you, what your role is on campus. But I think the conversation is really around how do we want the young people that we serve to grow? So that's one broad question. Another is, what are the challenges we're experiencing with providing instruction to the young people that we're serving? And I bet that answer to that question is sometimes when we're having discipline problems, a lot of kids are being sent to the office. So they're not in class to learn. They're frequently absent. They come to school with family trauma or experiences at home that are distracting and that they're not able to learn, or they're not ready for other reasons related to poverty and deprivation. That's the place to really start the conversation, I believe, to build some empathy for the fact that we need to fill children up with skills rather than setting up kind of punitive behavioral control systems for when they, for external regulation of behavior rather than internal regulation of health and well-being. Can I clarify that for anyone, or does anyone want to ask a follow-up question?
It doesn't sound like there are any additional questions.
Sure.
So
if you have
I want
anything that follows up, you see my email here. Feel free to email me.
Okay, great. Thank you, Megan, for doing that. And I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. Like I mentioned, this was our first webinar. Our next webinar is actually scheduled for April 4th. And in that session, we're going to learn about PDSA cycles, or Plan, Do, Study, Act cycles, and how they can be used in a school setting to evaluate various changes or improvements to your school or district. And then, as Megan had said in May, we'll talk a little bit more about SEL curriculum and how to choose one that will work best for your community. So in the meantime, please visit us online. Shoot me an email. You will get, like I said, this PowerPoint as well as the video from this presentation sometime this week. And I hope that everybody drives safely and stays warm tomorrow.
So
Thanks, Kelly. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Just let us know ahead of time, and we do get it on there for you. We do all kind of the legwork